Welcome everyone back to another episode of Energy Unleashed with Suzanne and Kim. Hello.
Hi, Suzanne.
How you doing?
Good. Good,
Yep.
good. Yeah.
Good, good. All
Yeah.
right. This is going to be kind of a little interesting one. I think you're gonna get kind of
Sorry.
one of these.
I'm moving around. You went.
Oh, that's okay. You got her?
I think I got her. Okay.
Sunshine on your shoulders,
Yeah,
right?
my sunglasses. I couldn't see the my glass through my glasses.
That's okay.
All
Okay,
right.
so had a client the other day, super interesting. Actually, a client and friend, I've known her for a long time, had a difficult year last year, lost her father, and she was very close to her father. It was a very long and couple years of him being sick and just really difficult emotionally on the loss of him. And she was here, and it's funny because I love when clients come in and they want to do a check-in on those that they've lost. And now it's been about a year, coming on a year, or actually a little over a year maybe. And during her session, of course, she says, check in on dad, blah, blah. So while I was doing the work, I also was channeling and I was getting a lot of information. And I did not know her father, but I know of her father through her. And I remember her dad being a lot of fun for her. And I remember her dad being pretty jovial and kind of silly and this and that. And it was super interesting because he told me what he was doing, and he was really working with a lot of as I recall, it was really working a lot with the files, meaning the Akashic, and really working with, really serious stuff. And he came through extremely serious. And when I told her that, she was really taken aback, and she's like, "No, no, that's not my dad. You didn't get my dad." And I thought, okay, but like I can't make this up. I get what I get. And she just was so taken aback. And she's like, no, that's not my dad. That's not his personality. He wouldn't be doing that. That's not you weren't getting my dad. And so I double check again and I'm like, no, I've got him. He's right here. I can hear it. And this is what he's doing, and this is him. And the level of seriousness and the level of his soul knowledge was so enormous, which tells me he was a very large soul in between lives. And she was just so confused. And I thought that this was going to be a really interesting one to talk about because oftentimes we think they're supposed to be who we know here in human form, and in between lives, we're not.
Well, that kind of makes sense in that if you have several past lives, right? You're not the
Right?
same personality or person in each lifetime.
Right?
So in between, what are you? Like,
Right.
oh my
Isn't it a
gosh.
weird concept to think about because no one
Because
thinks
you
about it?
when I think about my grandmas, I'm like, oh, I picture them, that they are who they were
Right.
over here.
So if grandma's wearing an apron and making apple pies here, you think she's wearing an apron and making apple pies there. And
Yeah.
oftentimes I get myself in trouble in terms of, oh, is my mom and my dad hanging out? And I'll say, no. And then people are like, well, why not? And just because they hung out in this lifetime, in this incarnation, doesn't mean that they're at the same vibration. So, what this is all about is vibrational frequency.
Okay.
And this is part of the journey of being a human. Part of the journey of us being down here is to raise our frequency as best we can so that we can get to the highest frequency of who we are in between lives, because we don't stop existing in between lives. We just don't exist in this personality construct or this personality anything necessarily. However, when somebody channels somebody and taps into somebody, or if that dead person comes to somebody or channels back this way across the veil, oftentimes we present this way. Why? Because that's our comfort zone,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Makes sense. That totally makes sense. Yeah.
And I'm going to
That's what
have
we
to
perceive
feel
it, right? This is what I
right.
would perceive it, not what they really are. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it works both ways because oftentimes we hear when somebody's dead and I get a visitation, he comes to me at 35. I remember one time when we were at the Palmer House, the haunted hotel that we did so much work at, and I did what we would call morphing, letting dead people come through and channel through, and I would change. And I literally changed into somebody's grandfather, but they said that that's my grandfather. I know it is, but that's my grandfather when he was like 40, not when he was like 80. And they said, I know it's him because I've seen the pictures and it still looks like him, but he's so young. Oftentimes they say that they'll come through as their most comfortable, like, expression of
Okay.
themselves, their most happy time, their most whatever. So I have the visitation of grandma at the end of my bed, but she's, 45 instead of 89. These are
So let me
confusing
clear
for
this up
people.
because I think I was doing it incorrectly before. It's not what I perceive them to be. It's what they are presenting themselves in their most comfortable time of their life here
It can be
when they
both.
knew me.
Yeah,
When
it
they knew
can
me.
be
Okay.
both. Yeah.
Okay.
So I can come through the veil being 45 because this is where I'm feeling good on the other side, right? Or I'm going to see them come through with an apron and an apple pie in their hand because that's what I know of my grandma. So it can go both ways. So remember, these packages are holographic in a lot of ways. Our actual presentation of these bodies, we're meat and bone here because we're in a density of 3D where everything is, here,
Mhm.
right? It's a density of here. But when we get higher and higher in our energy bodies, we're really pretty holographic light. And so we can shift and change things pretty easy. And when we're out of these bodies 100%, we just are light. So when I'm in between lives, what I wanted to point out is when I'm in between lives and somebody checks in and finds somebody, it's really important for us to have a more open mind that that doesn't not resonate just because that isn't the package I'm used to, right? It's
Yeah.
important for us to go, oh, that means we still do work in between lives, if we want to use that word, work. We
Mhm.
still do things, we still ascend, we still learn, we still study, we still, support, we still whatever. This is a different version of what happens here, right?
Mhm.
You and I were talking in between something just recently, and we were talking about you oftentimes hear that in between lives, you're a record keeper for the Akash.
Yes. Yeah, I do. It's come up several times in different sessions, different healing sessions. And then also my connection with the whales, I think is part of that because they are known to be the keepers of the Akash as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're like, well, that doesn't really resonate for me here in this life. And I'm laughing because as you're saying it when we were talking, you're recording everything and you're writing everything down.
What?
So there's a lot because you write everything down. You have 8 million different notebooks and you file everything and you keep track of everything and you keep track of thoughts and that's how you organize. And so oftentimes I find the incarnation is similar, not always, similar to the lifestyle that we have down here in some aspects, meaning if I keep records, I kind of keep records,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But in this client's case, it was super interesting. And as I said, she was really frustrated and she was doubtful. And then she was really confused and she was kind of getting irritated. And she said, but no, he was funny and he was, this and this. And he died fairly young, by the way. And I said, let me go back. So I go back and I tap in again and I'm like, okay, now he's pointing out half of the reason that he had that experience with you is because that is one of the choices that he came here to actually do.
Uh,
Because in between lives, he's very serious, he's very staunch, he's very this, and this. He chose an incarnation to come down here and have that experience with you because that's something that was really different and added to his overall, completeness, right? It was a chance for him to be childlike and silly and funny because that isn't the essence that he holds 100%. And so it added to the fullness of who he is in between lives. That's what we're doing. We're constantly filling more and more fractal aspects of who we are, even in between lives, through the choices that we have in our incarnations, if that's making sense.
well, I mean, it does, and it goes back to like look at if you anyone who's looked into their past lives, the differences between those lives of what was chosen coming down and what to accomplish or to experience
Mhm.
certain aspects of being on Earth in a human body. That makes sense to me. That
And or other because there's no rules to any of this, and there's no
Mhm.
common anything really, because there's others that are doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over because they haven't learned the lesson. Karmically speaking, I'm still not accomplishing what I came here to do, so I turn around and I do it another version of it and another version of it and another version of it, and then so it can be anything. There isn't a norm to this, and I
Well,
think
and actually, when we've talked about this before, because actually my aunt was a good example of um, she didn't learn what she came in here to do. And so the work that she was doing was in that other state, that other
in between.
essence or wherever in between. And
Yep.
that she was doing certain things there because she didn't accomplish what she wanted to hear or what she intended to hear. So,
And think of it this way. That means that aunt of yours isn't fully at the soul frequency 100% of their essence. They're still learning, 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 and adding to it. So we either learn down here in this world to add to it in a quicker way, or I leave this plane and I still have this work to do. Okay. And then when I get to this plane is still ascending all the time. It's adding in all kinds of information, whether I'm doing that in between lives with the so-called work I'm doing, again, silly word,
mhm.
with the so-called work I'm doing in between lives, or the choices that I'm doing with several incarnations happening. So it's not what we think it is. And I think what's super interesting too is if my mom isn't hanging out with my dad, that's not a bad thing. It's just that the frequencies aren't the same.
Right.
Maybe mom
Right.
didn't do as much work as dad did. Dad's up here and mom's still in this place where your aunt was. And so it's not a bad thing. And we take everything so literal in our world, like, oh my God, my mom and dad aren't hanging out. That's terrible. And it
Yeah.
isn't that they can hang out if they chose to in 2 seconds with intention over there, because that's all it is at that point is intention. And maybe something's happening down here on earth and they both intent and yes, they're together or I find each other for whatever reason, but we aren't necessarily vibrating at the same frequencies over there. So it isn't like we're hanging out and going bowling and having pizza together. It's not, that's not what it is. you know
Ugh,
I know
okay.
people have a hard time with the in between, right?
Yeah, and I understand why, because we want it to be something, beautiful and happy and all of the things that and still have that connection with them because we need the connection, not
Yeah,
necessarily that they need the connection.
yeah.
But yeah, I think it's an interesting concept in that um like for your client that to be so upset that he's more serious than what she remembered him. I mean, that's work for her to do on herself, like with herself, because of her expectations of what he is, right?
Because that to her wasn't familiar enough to say, are you sure you found my dad and my dad really isn't there? Or is that a different version
Yeah.
of my dad? Or where is my dad? And that gets really scary for people,
Yeah, okay.
right? I mean,
So
that gets really
over
scary.
figuring out why she's afraid of that and
Yeah.
removing that fear is something important for her to, I would think, work on.
Yeah, and just because we don't present the same doesn't, I mean, I maybe don't present, let's just even do relationships. Maybe I have a boyfriend when I'm 16 and I have a different boyfriend when I'm 23. I don't present the same because I'm at a different space, right? And so I'm the same person, but I'm not the same person at all. And so that's kind of the same thing. We're not a person there, we're an aspect or we're an essence there. And remember, let's go back to the thing where people are upset because mom and dad aren't together. If mom and dad were seriously close in twin flames, for example, they come from the same essence anyway. When we get higher and higher in our frequencies, we're fractalized into different aspects. And the higher we go back to that completing, the higher we go back up that so-called ladder. We all come from the same thing anyway. So for me to not be hanging out and playing bowling and eating pizza with dad on the other side doesn't matter anyway because I am dad on the other side. That's where it's really mind screwy.
Oh, got it. Okay. That is
Yeah.
really mind screwy. I mean, it goes back to beliefs. Like, what do you
Mhm.
believe based on what you were taught or your religion or whatever that is on how this all works?
Definitely. And that is part of the death process. So if I have a belief system that says this is the architecture in between lives, I'm going to experience that to
Mhm.
some extent. If I have a belief system that says I'm going to go to hell or purgatory. I'm going to experience hell or purgatory to some extent because the belief system drives the actual energy to a lock-in of a location of sorts, even though there's no location. It's just
Right,
energy.
right.
Eventually, in my understanding, the way I believe and think and traverse that space is not forever and ever amen, because eventually we all figure out that this isn't what we think it is, and we all do find that frequency of ascending and going back to source eventually, but we will have those experiences per what we think. If I think I'm going to be greeted by my dead mom and dad, I will be greeted by my dead mom and dad. If I think, mean grandma's going to be there and I'm scared, mean grandma will be there and I will be scared, because I get to have that co-creation in my death experience just as much as I have that co-creation in my life experience. Right? I
That's
mean,
really, I've heard you say this before, read in your book. It just hit me differently right now for whatever reason. But that when we co-create, we're co-creating even on the other side,
yes.
but co-creating the experience of death based on fear or based on love, based on, that's going to create whatever experience you're living in,
Yep.
right? Ah,
And
okay, so,
so if I have really negativity and fear, I maybe have a much more difficult death process. That is in the Death and Dying book. There was a case study in there where the guy was so scared and he was really struggling to die because he was fearful of past lives and things like that.
mhm,
So that does make the death process more difficult. Now, that said, when we get through that death process, eventually the humanness of our belief system will fade. The humanness of our belief system in the individual incarnation will fade, and we will transmute and transition into the higher version of our essence.
mhm.
But that in between, it's the in between in the in between. Okay, that little transitionary period is going to present as I go into it with my belief systems from this personal experience here. So, be aware of that.
Well, also, I guess my question to you is, we know that within our lineage, that some of these beliefs or sadness or different things can come through the different generations, right? Like, so when you're co-creating, um, I don't know where I want to go with this, but if I'm co-creating my experience on death, but I've been doing work to understand that this has been happening within my lineage and removing the fear and
Mhm.
removing some of the beliefs and releasing them, then what you're totally telling us is that the experience will be a much easier experience going through that transition.
And when you're in between lives, the reason why lineage clearing is important is, let's say that there's been sexual abuse for 4 generations of
Mm,
women by the men.
yeah.
Just using that for an example. And when I do lineage clearing of that, and I offer that as a clearing for myself, and I release all that negativity and I offer it through the so-called matrix of my lineage line, my lineage soul pod,
Mm,
I offer the ability of clearing that. They don't have to take it by any means, but I offer it in terms of, we've let this go on behalf of the extended family, keeping fractaling into the same silly lesson. This is detrimental. This is negative. This is
mm,
fear-based, blah, blah, blah. We release it. And they have the option to go, oh, okay, now I don't have to go back and karmically do that again either. Because again, the higher that we go on this so-called, it almost looks like a corporate flow chart. The higher we go on the flow chart, we all become one. So I'm very fractaled and individual here, and I'm fractaled in my lives, but then I start to get into my lineage, and the lineage fractals into each of those people having their individual lives, but here we're collective, right?
yeah, okay.
So if I'm releasing down here and down here as individuals, this affects the collective opportunity.
Hmm.
So the more we do clearing, the higher the effectiveness goes.
Gosh, that's so fascinating. I
Yeah,
mean,
it is. It's amazing because we are all becoming one. When we keep going higher on that so-called flow chart, we are all coming from an essence. We are all coming from source. So individualized fractalization work affects the collective. And it's so hard for us to get that because we only think we're us, you
yeah,
know.
right,
It's difficult.
right. Gosh, but it's such important work.
And think of this. Think of us even understanding that organizational chart. We don't necessarily study that here, so we don't get it. But now let's be in between lives, and I'm so-called dead, okay? And I'm gone out of this individual fractal, but I'm starting to have a bigger picture and awareness of the fractalization, and I'm starting to see all of that, right? I'm understanding that. So let's go back to my client's dad. Maybe before he was her dad, he goes in between lives and says, "Oh, in my family fractal, we need a really great round of humor this time coming in, and I'm going to pick this as my spouse, this is my children, this is my grandchildren, etc. And I'm going to have part of my mission going in at humor and love and joviality and all this with this group because this is a piece that I would like to extend into my own individualness as a soul, but also into my family lineage." And so that's that choice to come in.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to me how this
Yeah.
all connects.
So, and again, it's interesting because oftentimes those are the people that leave early when they're very specific. I've had other clients do this too, when they're very specific and coming in for a very specific small amount of lessons. And I hate to use that word, but I get that lesson done and I leave. So I'm going to leave with a sickness or a car accident or a something because I don't have to sit here and have my body deteriorate and be 80 and get crabby and crunky because that's not what I came to do.
Mhm.
I came to be joyful and silly and fun. So I'm only going to experience this death process for a very short amount of time at a young age because I'm done.
And that's
And he's
part of the
public.
contract, though, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Unless they're
that's
making
not,
choices once they're here, because again, it's not all like if they make different choices and go down a different path for a while and come back, I could extend that life
yeah.
based
And I
on
mean, there's nothing in stone for any of this in the Akash because everything's free will driven and it's all in there. And again, we've talked about this before. Here's your line of your Akash, and you can certainly go on a tributary and open up a million more Akash opportunities. That it's endless. But oftentimes when we see somebody coming in a personality that is not matching what's happening on the other side, we seem to forget the other side is infinite, happening all the time simultaneously. So my soul essence is still understanding this flow chart. It's understanding lineage. It's understanding other galaxies, multitudes and multitudes of universes. We're so small-minded when we think of death.
Oh my
So
gosh.
now I'm in between lives, and if I'm into the Akasha, I'm understanding, there is no time. This is millions of years, and multitudes of universes. I mean, it's that times a gazillion, and we're thinking that it has to do with that isn't, who I thought that was. It's very confusing for us,
Oh gosh. It's a
right?
yeah. I would it would be hard, especially when you're still grieving so much for
Yes.
someone to be like, wait a minute, that's not who I'm grieving with or who I'm grieving for. You know what?
Exactly. So, and own that. You get to own who you're grieving for because it is a fractal of that. And I'm not and pointing this out in a negative way at all. She gets to own that 100%. But why this can help the grief is to understand that holy bananas, my dad in a larger version of who my dad is perfectly, not only perfectly fine in between, but is amazingly powerful. And how cool is it that he picked me for this really finite experience
Yeah.
of the thing that I loved the most about him. I
Mhm.
mean, it can switch your grief, actually.
But it actually helped form, I mean, her experiences with him have helped create her as an individual,
Right. Hence the
right?
co-conjure. Yeah.
So take the good with that.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And I have clients that I have followed their so-called dead loved ones for years, and they do change. They change because the frequency changes and it confuses them. I have another client who always wants me to check in with her dead husband, and I'm like, he's totally different now, and she's like, that confuses her.
Mhm.
And it isn't that he's totally different. It's when I tap into the essence of him, he's more educated, he's more understanding. He doesn't care about 3D stuff anymore. We aren't going to sit in between lives and care if we're 25 pounds overweight down here. It's not a thing. But when we're experiencing someone down here that was really health and fitness oriented and don't understand that, it's like, wait, don't they carry that into that life? Only for that fractal file, not for the big picture. So it's confusing.
Yeah, it's a complicated concept. I've listened to you teach this how many times, and there's still parts of it where I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
It just, I
And I
think,
always put the caveat on the end of it, we could all die tomorrow and be totally wrong too.
yeah, right.
Because in the defense of the person who's doing channeling, I also only get what I get when I get it how I get it.
Hmm.
So who's to say that that's even on, right or not, I mean, we don't know. I will never forget I did a class on I think it was an open gallery where I was channeling, just channeling, period, for people, question, Q&A, blah, blah. And I did tapped into somebody's mother. And the gal was there who was the daughter, as was the aunt. So so the dead person was the one gal's mother and the one gal's sister.
Hmm.
Okay. And they were together. And they were asking about a brother that was still on planet with them. And he was really struggling. And should mom, tell him this? Or what does mom think about that? Or what does mom feel he should do? And I'm like, the mom had been dead so long that she didn't care. I mean, she wasn't worried. It wasn't a thing. And because she had gone through so much of her own growth in between lives, she was letting go of that 3D feeling of my son has to do this or not do this. She had the overall understanding and awareness that her son was on his own journey, and she was pulling back from that fractalized version of what mother would have thought or said, right? Are you
Right.
following?
I am. Yeah.
I'm giving this information out, and which was really actually lovely because that allowed these two women to pull back also and not feel like they were responsible for giving a message from the dead mom and then making the brother do something or not do something, right? I mean, we need to step out of everyone's journey. But so I was presenting it this way, and there was a gal in the audience who blatantly budged out in my session, which was amazing to me, stood up and said, "Well, I'm a channel too." And I go, "Okay." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "That's not the message I'm getting." And I'm like, "Wow." I was so taken aback that someone would even do that. I mean,
Mm.
if that was me, I would have waited till after class and pulled them aside if I really felt I had to. But nope, this woman budged out, and I said, "Okay." And she proceeded to say, "No, the mom wants him to do this and this and this and this." And it was so astounding to me because I'm like, now the audience was completely confused. The family members were confused. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, okay, how do I handle this professionally without wanting to go pop this woman in the middle of my class because it was so disruptive, right?
What's terrible?
And it was very fear-based all of a sudden. And it was starting to put questions in everybody's head like, I don't know what's happening here. So I calmed her down and I said, I thank you. I appreciate what you did. And it's awesome that you did that. And then I said, now I'm going to give you all a lesson on channeling and the in between. And I said, here's the difference. This particular woman over here probably is a channel, and that's awesome. And she gets to do that and she gets to get that information. But she channels at the frequency that she's at. So if she is a channeler that has a lot of fear-based still, and she's at this frequency, she's going to find that dead person at this frequency. And
Oh,
this isn't
yeah.
about value saying I'm better and I'm wonderful, but my frequency was different in understanding the oneness and the openness of the education of between lives. And so I find mom at this frequency.
That's amazing.
It
Hmm.
was amazing. And it gave a really great learning opportunity for the audience, even though it was very disruptive and weird. But what we need to understand if we choose to get this concept of, I can always pull my dad at this frequency when he was the funny and jovial, but he was really scared of dying, or I can find my dad now who he truly is in between lives with the glory and the wonder of that, but not the fear of the death and the sadness and the da 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 da.
Yeah.
They're all there. It's all that it depends on what dial you're on the radio to bring the information through.
Gosh, that just makes so much sense. I mean,
Yeah.
why wouldn't it? If, especially channeling from a fear-based or from a, real 3D frequency,
Yeah.
that it would present that way.
And
That's
when we're in between lives, it doesn't mean that there isn't a version or a fractal of that mother that's still holding
yeah.
irritation, control, blah, blah. But the whole point of in between lives is to drop all that stuff. We're supposed to, and I wouldn't normally use that word, but we're supposed to be doing this work now in
Yes.
this body so that I'm not a controlling, angry, nasty mom anyway. But if I die and I'm still at that frequency, of course I can find that in her records or in her frequency
Mhm.
of the overall. But there is also the higher version that learned through that because she did that work that she didn't do here. We were doing that with your aunt. Remember,
Right.
she didn't do that
Right.
work. So now when mom does that work, Suzanne as a channel finds her through the work. The other person finds her without the work.
Right.
Yeah, it's really
Right.
crazy.
It is. It's so interesting though. And the more that you do here, again, the point is if you're working on those things here, the easier the process is and the higher frequency you'll be as you go
And the
through the death
higher you
process.
are, I'll never forget, I wrote about this in my death and dying book too. The one gentleman that I worked with, Robert, and he was 80 some years old and he wanted to die at the highest frequency he could. He knew this. I want to die
Um,
at the highest frequency I can so that I can slide right into the job that my soul already knows that I have over there. It was fascinating to me. And I was so aghast with him. This is years and years ago. And, he was a complete channeler for himself. He used a pendulum. He had notebooks upon notebooks of past lives. He was really into the structure of the dimensional realities and understanding what he still needed to do, et cetera, et cetera. And he said to me, I need to die in this body at the highest frequency I can so I can go right into my job and I don't have to get diverted into another classroom. And I thought that was fascinating. And that was, 20 years ago almost now. It was crazy cool. So it makes so much sense when we look at it like this, and it can give us so much peace. And it can also give us a nudge to do the work here on this plane
mhm. Yeah,
because we have
absolutely.
easier lives and we have easier deaths, and we certainly have a faster in between.
Yeah.
So,
No, that I mean your book is a really great resource for
yeah,
understanding the process
yeah.
and what it means to go through that. And so when you're looking at your core beliefs and your, just all the especially in the root chakra, well, all of them, but that you can make such a difference in that process. So
Especially
good.
about death, because nobody's getting out of it.
No, not at all. We're all going to go through it. I don't have your
Yeah.
book sitting here. Sorry.
Nobody's getting out of death. I got one in front of my desk. That's this book.
There it
So
is.
yeah. Energy Healer's Book of Dying. And I think his name is Roger in the book, actually. But yeah, Roger or Robert. It's been a long time. But yeah, I think that this is just something to ponder. And it also gives us it can give us a really sense of peace that our loved ones are always going to be fine. People get very confused on where they go and are they okay? Those are the questions I always get. And there isn't a place, and it isn't about being okay. It's a frequency, and we are always learning and changing our frequencies if we're doing the work. And the work never ends. And it again, work is not the correct word, but in our English terminology, we don't really have a word that describes the work that we do because it isn't
Yeah.
really work.
It is hard. I mean, especially when I first started coming to see you or do work with you, it's like, what is the work?
Yeah.
Like it's not in a spread, like we're gonna go back to it's not in a spreadsheet. It's not in a, you
And
know,
we're not punching a time clock in between lives. It's not
Mhm.
like that. But yeah,
No,
it's
no.
so anyway, that was a super cool one I thought I wanted to share. So that was fun.
It was a good one. I like
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
like it.
All right, everybody. Hope you got a little something out of that one, or at least entertainment. And so maybe hit the share button, the like button, or the subscribe. We'd love to have you online and learn more from you and maybe leave us a comment.
Yeah,
Okay.
and please share. I think it's
Yeah.
great.
Till next, Cosmic
Goodbye.
Hug.